Thank you for joining us. I think we're in a slightly unusual position where we're all competing to try and make slight improvements to what we all agree is a necessary and positive move in legislation. My question is just around the source of the funding for the RCM, and the government made clear that their preference is that comes from a levy on users. Alternatives, I think we see in other jurisdictions, is that comes from ETS sources to slightly more directly couple the emissions component to the consumption. Whilst again the intention I think is clear to not predicate that source of funding to the money being provided. Do any of the panellists have an opinion on those two options and the path that the government has taken for the funding source?
May I start on this? There are really only two options for the levy, either airlines or aviation fuel supplies. And I think a large part of why aviation fuel supplies may have been chosen because administratively they are the obligated party when it comes to the mandate. They are expected to pass the cost of the mandate through to airlines, their fuel customers. They would be expected to pass the cost of the levy to airlines, or indeed, if the levy actually brings in money, because these are very small balances of money in comparison with the balances of money to do with the mandate, they would be expected to pass those costs back to the customers. So it's aiming to deal fairly with a fairly small amount of money. It's not the additional cost of the fuel, the sustainable aviation fuel, it's just the cost of levelising and stabilising it, which is a sliver in comparison.
I think for us as airlines, the funding is a really critical issue, and it is about sort of fairness and accountability. So as Gaynor said, the understanding is it'll be the levy will be on the supplier, the costs. So the issue for us is we understand the costs are likely to be passed through to airlines. We just want to make sure that is transparent. Without getting sidetracked, we've seen through the early stages of the mandate there is some concern that there are perhaps excessive compliance fees being put onto the SAF. Voluntary SAF seems to be a lot cheaper than mandated SAF, and you wouldn't necessarily think there should be a clear reason for that. So transparency in terms of how the levies pass through. And as Gaynor said, in theory, if the market price for SAF is high, if there's relatively little of it, then it's likely that actually the suppliers will be paying into the counterparty rather than. And for us, what we want to make sure is that if there is money essentially being paid back to the counterparty from the producers, that money doesn't just go to the suppliers and sit there. There should be a mechanism, a transparent mechanism, however that works, through which that money is then coming back to airlines and airline customers. So it has to work both ways, essentially. How you do that, and we've looked at ETS for a long time, and you're right, in the European Union, the emissions trading scheme funds are used, they are practically using them, for example, to help close the price gap on SAF. Now, we're not doing that, and that has competitiveness implications for UK SAF. It's separate to the RCM, but yeah, there are ways you can look at to help make sure that airlines it's a two-way street.
I think we have to recognise that effectively, if the desire is to pass this on to the passengers, the airlines and the people who are actually shipping freight around the world by plane, then you should be putting the charge on them. That is the most direct way of doing it. There are charges now which are put on airlines and on freight directly. There's no reason why you can't do this as well. And I don't buy the argument that effectively, well, it's a relatively small amount of money, therefore we should just put it on the fuel suppliers and they should deal with it. I don't think that's right. I certainly don't agree with the idea that this is because the polluter pays, because I think that's just erroneous and a false statement. And I think we do not know how much this is going to be, because we don't know how many projects are going to be, we don't know what the costs are going to be, we don't know how the CFD mechanism is going to be. So we do not know what the cost of this is going to be. I do support what Rob is saying, which is, if this is something which is going to be imposed upon us, I neither wish to profit from it, nor do I wish to do anything else. What I want to do is pass it on 100% onto the consumer of my fuel. Now, the only way in which I can do that is if I know what it is ahead of time, so that I can bill them the exact amount of money, so that they pay the exact amount of money. And at the moment, this legislation talks about market share. Market share moves, market share can change, and therefore that's a very imprecise way of doing this. It is a very, very fine margin business. If you get this wrong, you will make the UK a less attractive market, and we'll have to understand that fundamentally, people will do different things around their molecules. One data point I think is worthwhile remembering is that about 70% of the jet consumed in the UK at the moment is imported, right? And effectively you rely on people bringing jet to market in order to sell it profitably. If they are uncertain around the cost of that jet, they are going to potentially look to sell that jet into different markets, which can have an energy security issue and a kind of market dynamic issue. There are unintended consequences here that I think need to be thought through very carefully.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for joining us. It's been very helpful, the evidence you've given so far. We mentioned a question earlier about the availability of waste feedstocks and waste hierarchy. That's one source of raw fuel or raw material for some of the second generation SAFs. Do you feel that enough is being done across government in a holistic way to ensure that the goals of the SAF mandate and the RCM and what we're trying to achieve with this bill is enough being done to ensure that the things that are needed, so the waste fuel stocks, the waste feedstock, the reforms to planning, energy production for SAFs, that sort of stuff. What's going to hold back what we're trying to achieve in this bill that needs to be done elsewhere?
I think it's a really strong point, and there is a key question about the waste hierarchy that Gaynor spoke to. So currently, SAF, waste going into SAF is treated the same as incineration or energy from waste. Now, it's quite clear from all analysis that you get twice as much energy capture from producing SAF than you do from energy from waste. So it feels to us that this is, you're getting a lot more bang for your buck by using waste to produce SAF than other. So we think that should be reflected in that waste hierarchy and prioritised for aviation. Certainly on renewable energy, the Sustainable Aviation roadmap last year, it's quite clear that particularly when we come to 3G SAF, where you basically electrolyse water to get hydrogen and you capture CO2 from the atmosphere, that's going to take a lot of renewable electricity. So we're going to need a lot more of that within the UK if we're going to support a domestic power-to-liquid market.
Yeah. And I think in addition to that, we need to think about other areas of SAF when we talk about SAF having a nominal kind of value associated with its ability to reduce GHG, working alongside DESNZ, DBT to understand how carbon can form part of the solution and actually really decarbonise the SAF that we're producing is also key, along with kind of working side by side with the Treasury to understand what the kind of revenues from ETS looks like. I think that has been quite successful in the last few years, especially when in the advent of the Jet Zero Task Force. I think that was a really key turning point, and I think we could continue in that vein to work cross-departmentally and across industry to really kind of work through some of these finer details. So I think it's been very useful to be part of the Jet Zero Council. We're actually co-chair alongside Mike Keane for the Jet Zero Task Force. So I think carrying on in that vein is very important and useful.
And what this also enables us to do is it enables us to reduce our dependence on used cooking oil that's imported from elsewhere in the world as a feedstock for first generation SAF. So actually, as a strategic move, moving towards 2G and 3G, that does give more flexibility and capability for the market to scale up in the long term, in the long run as well, and using waste product in the UK as opposed to having to ship it in from China or Southeast Asia.
It was just a pushback challenge on the comments about SAF actually being very popular and the earlier pushback we'd had on this £1.50 per passenger on top of tickets. Actually, does that suggest that this would actually be easier to sell, easier to promote to passengers than you might have suggested in the first place? But I think the suggestion was that certain demographics, certain airline customer groups would be more or less in favour and able to pay it.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, your average leisure traveller for us, they see, to put it in colloquial terms, it's your problem to solve. We want you to do it, but we're not going to pay for it. when you come to corporates, they have their own corporate targets. So from a B2B perspective, they want to hit that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both. Good to see you again. A lot of the criticism, a lot of the cynicism over the value of SAF and its environmental benefits, I think you've alluded to it, is around the fuel, the fuel source, the feed stuff. The bill that we have in front of us concentrates on second, third generation. Do you see this as enabling a lot of the potential greenwashing of SAF that may have been behind all of that cynicism? Does this address some of those challenges? And then a kind of a follow-up question, similar question to what I asked the previous panel. What do you see as some of the challenges across government that will hold back your ability to produce more SAF? And you referenced the ability to use some of the feed stuff to produce second generation SAF mixing, but also I think planning and energy as well will be some of those responses as well.
Naomi, do you want to go first on the first question? Yeah, so I think on the sustainability and fraud, I mean, I've been working on sustainability certification over a number of different types of fuel types, and for us to go through, like for example, we have ISCC, which is kind of like an auditing process that we generally have to go through. There's other providers out there, but you have to go through that process to be able to prove the sustainability of your fuel. And this is a very complicated and rigorous process, and I've gone through it many times on different types of fuels. So I think on the sustainability piece, actually the guidance that's been put out already in the SAF mandate is very high, and we do have to kind of go through a lot of that process, a lot of that auditing process, which I think, to your point around the risk of fraud and other challenges around greenwashing that potentially could have happened in the past, I think that the UK has done a good thing there with how it's approached this. So I would kind of support the approach that we're taking. That's not necessarily in this bill. I would say that that's more kind of already been laid out in the mandate rules itself. On kind of what else we would like to see potentially through this, I think, as I said before, the piece around, the SAF allowances. This is a scheme currently in Europe that is used, funded through ETS revenues. So again, trying to not, obviously you're always taking from somewhere with funding, but trying to take at least from the funding source that is coming directly from industry and then using that to then fund the industry back with SAF. I think that is got good bones and good structure, and I would love to see that being potentially fleshed out. On a kind of more practical level, for sure, planning. We've just had a recent example that some of my engineers have told me, waiting 2 months back for an answer on a very kind of small question, and it's not because of the quality of the planning teams, they're fantastic, it's the fact that they're quite constrained, there's kind of not enough of them. So I suppose there's a potential short to medium term fix there, but also a longer term fix in terms of thinking of the skills that we need moving forward. And I think that's across, we automatically think of kind of more engineering STEM kind of roles, but also we still need the rest of the value chain adequately kind of, in terms of, with workforce and other things. The other thing that I would say, I alluded earlier to the details in the mandate being really good on the sustainability piece. I think that there are still some very complex rules that we're consistently trying to navigate. Still 6 months on afterwards, there's different interpretations to different questions. For example, in the nitty-gritty on how hydrogen is treated, or on rules around electricity and displacement. So they're kind of more in the detail, but we do end up spending quite a lot of time on them as a company, trying to break through into this market. But equally, learning experience from my colleagues doing these projects all across the world. We've got other projects going on in India, Australia. I really want the UK, as a Brit, I want the UK to be our flagship and our first, and I'm working really hard to make sure that it is. But as I always say to people, I'm competing with my colleagues in Australia and all over, because lots of people are wanting SAF, and I think it's just how can we make it as efficient and easy as possible, keeping in mind all of that good sustainability criteria to actually just get steel on the ground here in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, the route we are using is an ASTM route, which is approved already, the FTSPK route. Now on sustainability, the feedstock criteria is well defined in the SAF mandate. And all the types of feedstock which are eligible to produce SAF is well defined, so we are complying with that. Also, the GHG and CI is also another factor for measuring sustainability. So, for our project without carbon capture, we are at minus 80-85% from the fossil equivalent. With carbon capture, we'll go negative. We'll go to even more than minus 200. And this is key for us. Now on what could be done better, I think, planning is always an area where we need improvement in terms of time, but also connection to the grid, for example. Grid connections takes a very long time. I mean, in our case, we decided to produce our own power at site using a biomass boiler rather than waiting for a grid connection, because the answer we got is that we'll get it by end of 2030, the 2030s, 2039. We'll get it, and we cannot wait, of course, up to that time. Another requirement which is very specific to us is to get connected as early as possible once we start producing SAF by end of 2029 to the carbon network, especially when there is this unique benefit for the UK. I mean, this is, by the way, very unique to the UK. No other country has a SAF mandate, which is carbon scaling, in the same time has the capability to capture the CO2, and this is also unique in Europe because UK and Norway together has the capacity of 75% of carbon capture in Europe, so it's really very unique to the UK. So our ask is to get also potentially connected to reduce carbon intensity, provide a better price per certificate, and also pay, because we don't need subsidy for carbon capture. We are ready to pay the transport and storage cost to the government for carbon capture. So these are the three main points.
Taylor. You've given a really helpful view of the long-term solution. I don't think many would argue with PTL being the solution in for the industry. What I wonder is, again, it's a similar question to I've asked other panel members, is about how other parts of government, other levers, other enablers need to be brought in place to enable you to do what you need to do, that this bill sets the conditions to do. So what do you see as the main challenges for the government to act? Again, planning, skills, you've spoken about skills. What else do you see needs to be done to enable you to be successful in this bill to achieve what it's trying to achieve?
I think, coming back to the IP, I think there needs to be some sort of support for e-fuels core technology development. I think that's very, very important. If you want e-fuels to be part of the future, we need to make sure that that research is supported in the UK, and when it's supported in the UK, that there is proper IP regulation of that, and that needs to be mandated as part of the support from the government. I feel that what's happening in the aviation area is actually clearer cut, because you can't get the energy density into an aircraft with hydrogen or electric, so it's kind of obvious. But I do think it's a solution for a lot of the fossil-based fuels, including gasoline and diesel. So I think what we'll end up doing is if we can develop that core technology, it's transferable to other sectors. And with that, we will be able to deal with the real problem, which is the end-to-end solution of getting renewable energy to the consumer. And that's the real challenge. It's not, at the moment we're talking about sustainable aviation fuel, but actually there's a lot of energy in the North Sea that's not getting used because there's a real challenge of the cost of getting it from there to the consumer. And this is where e-fuels come in. And this bill would help move us in the right direction to start to tackle that problem, because you would have these companies with the new tech working out how to make that viable. There's a very good paper that's been written, very well researched by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the US and the Department of Energy. It was done back in 2021. I actually had a conversation with our CEO and the board and realised one day, I said to them, we're not actually a fuels company, although we're called Zero Petroleum and we're making jet fuel and gasoline. I said, well, actually, we're an energy transmission company, because all the problems that we've got with renewable energy are actually solved by liquid hydrocarbons. If you look at this paper I refer to, it was done back in 2021. The cost of getting energy from the North Sea in a cable to the consumer is probably 40 to 50-fold what it is if you wanted to do it with a liquid hydrocarbon. And that's actually what the fundamental problem is that we're going to struggle with going forwards, and we're slowly going to morph as technology and engineering dictates rather than policy what the solution is, if that makes sense.
Can I just come back and just for clarity, and forgive my technical inexperience, what you're suggesting then is the actual production of the hydrocarbon at the source, you know, at the base of a wind turbine, that's then collected in tanks and rather than transmission over cables.
Correct. And also within that report there was comparisons to hydrogen, which was a 6-fold increase over a 2-foot oil pipeline. And there's also ethanol, methanol, ammonia, all sorts of, they just looked at how do you get energy from A to B in the cheapest OPEX and CAPEX form. And that's kind of like a fundamental, that's what all the engineering will come back to, the cost of getting the renewable energy. And I believe that the renewable energy will be in remote locations, a bit like where the oil is today. Ultimately, we're going to put renewable energy in places where there's no, hopefully we don't cover up all the fertile soil with solar panels, and we can actually generate it elsewhere, and then we can use the power to liquids to get it from A to B.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Downey stole my question, so I'll develop a bit further. And the RCM sets the levy onto the fuel producers, who will likely pass it on to passengers. You operate internationally and see mechanisms being implemented elsewhere in the world. Again, we've mentioned the possibility of alternative of using the ETS to fund the RCM. How do you see the advantages of one system or the other, and where have you seen alternatives being done elsewhere that have worked well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think first and foremost, the UK is ahead of pretty much everybody else when it comes to developing these mechanisms. So I know that the EU is basically inspired by the RCM, is trying to come up with something similar, that they're going to be announcing in September, the framework of that in the Sustainable Transport Investment Plan. And I think there the initial thoughts is indeed to fund that through ETS. I don't think I've got a very strong preference between ETS funded or levy funded. The most important thing is that it's clear, it's transparent, and it's consistent and predictable. And then And when we know the details and we find out how the whole mechanism is going to work, we can perfectly live with the levy mechanism, as long as that practically works. So we don't have a strong preference between ETS or levy funded.
Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my question is relatively straightforward. Does this bill go far enough to allow us to proceed with aviation expansion and be consistent with our climate change goals?
I think this bill is part of a package of measures from the government. I think it's absolutely vital. This bill, alongside the SAF mandate, I would see them as equally important. The SAF mandate in driving a requirement for 10% SAF, and this bill to encourage domestic investment in domestic production. I would say those are vital tools. There are a range of other steps that the government is taking. I'm not here as a spokesperson for the government, but the Jet Zero strategy outlines a range of measures to support the ongoing development of more efficient aircraft. I said that's a key tool in our toolkit. Modernising airspace, the new UK Airspace Design Service, vital for more efficient airspace, support for new hydrogen technology and greenhouse gas removals. But I think this is vital as part of a package.
Okay. The SAF mandate is 10% by 2030. When you look at the EU, it's much lower. It's 6%, I think. When we're up to 22% by 2040, but elsewhere the target increases quite more dramatically. Because Heathrow is such a large user, you said 17%. That's a massive component. Is that going to be achievable though, with the goals and the targets that are set out in this bill? And I know you said that there are other things that need to be done as part of a suite, but again, I guess the question really is like, is this enough, or do you need to see more, more aggression and more ambition with the investments in firms through, skills and the measures I think that we've drawn out from previous witnesses around protection of IP? Like, do you see this as being enough?
I think this is a very strong start from the UK. I was smiling when the Shell representative said that the EU had been inspired by the measures the UK is taking here. I think it is a really, and joking aside, talking to fuel suppliers and investors to get a sense of how they're seeing the market, they do say that this package of mandates and revenue certainty mechanism is a really strong policy package from the UK. I think for Heathrow, to answer your question, we've been invited by the government to submit updated proposals for our expansion plans by the end of this month, and we'll be setting out within those our views on our future trajectory to net zero. We think this, the mandate and revenue certainty mechanism are absolutely vital. The government, I think, has already said that it wants to keep the mandate levels under review, and you are right that the EU does, although we're more ambitious to begin with and the EU less, actually the EU takes over. And I think our view is that heading over time more in the direction of the EU ambition will be important for Heathrow, but for aviation generally. But I think that's something we'll keep under review. What I would also say is actually getting started, a strong start this decade to show that we can begin to produce SAF, which we are globally. We can use it in the UK, which we are, but we can produce it in the UK as well, is really important.
Yeah. I'll be very careful with this question. So we have questions about investors and appetites to put money into these technologies, to refineries, to production, particular projects. There was previously a fairly strong consensus on the need to address climate change, and this is one of the sorts of projects that we're doing to mitigate a lot of those impacts. There's fair amount of rhetoric at the moment about stopping projects, stopping investment in net zero projects in particular regions, some of which have heavy dependency at the moment or high frequency of these sorts of projects existing in North Lincolnshire and Humberside and that sort of area. Is there a risk that that sort of rhetoric damages investor confidence and we see challenges around delivering the jobs, delivering the plants, and actually seeing the capacity that we need come online with that sort of language, those sorts of pronouncements being made?
I think absolutely there is. I mean, it does feed into the overall narrative in the UK on the direction of SAF, and it's more than just at the regional level. There's also murmurings around the strength of the mandate itself and it being upheld. So all of these murmurings impact the narrative and the appetite for investors. So the more that we can do to support these first generation plants, getting through final investment decision and getting through to production, the better we prove out the sector as a viable sector in the second and third generation fuels, and then that narrative falls away because we have proof that it is a commercially viable product.
I admire your faith that narrative might fall away, but yes, I agree with the rest of the answer.
Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. As a Liberal Democrat, I want to come back and talk about bins again. I think incineration and ERF, I think broadly is seen as the least worst option. So if there is a alternative now, I think lots of us are going to be very interested in the opportunities for local authorities, the opportunities for making conditions better for our residents, and if that means cheaper bin collection, then we're all going to be very much in favour of that. What I have questions about is the big picture of that, and how there's the potential there to de-incentivise recycling because the fuel, the feedstock for SAF now becomes more valuable. Do you actually undermine the efforts to recycle? Bit of a question in, kind of a more technical question in how plastics recycling actually may well be better diverted into this process and actually solve a lot of the problems we have with the recycling issues around plastics and exporting those and energy used in that. Question on how many of our energy from waste facilities are linked to now heat networks, and whether that bigger picture is being considered, not just producing electrons, as you say, but using waste heat for district heating networks. So there is a bit of an additional complexity for that. But that kind of leads into the bigger question of the bill and how that holistic view across different departments and the incentives that this bill creates, which I'm sure are all positive, and it's promoting more sustainable options, better options in different departments, whether there's enough work being done elsewhere for this to work within that bigger system. So you've got 15 minutes.
Look, my roots are as a kind of a fuels and energy guy, so I'm not going to be able to really respond with much expertise to some of the more specific questions around the waste sector. But I'll do my best by starting with the general statement that I think you're quite right, that the second that waste becomes more valuable than an alternative use of that waste, then you've got to start questioning whether it's really waste. Now, funnily enough, actually that's more of an issue in some of the first generation products that we're using, where the wastes are actually now becoming more valuable than they are as virgin vegetable oils, which I think is a different issue but very important. In this case, for as long as people are either not getting anything for it or having to, pay to get rid of it, then I think the risk of it distorting other parts of the hierarchy are manageable, and particularly with a sensible degree of oversight and monitoring. So I wouldn't lose too much sleep about that. You're going to have to help me with the other parts of the question.
It's then the kind of the broader question about how this sits within that. Yeah. The implications of this bill are pretty broad in the way the incentives are going to come into a whole different set of markets: agriculture, waste, local government.
So first of all, I challenge that this is an incentive. I think of it more as an insurance policy. And if you're a recipient of the insurance policy, If it turns out that the market price is higher than you contracted for your strike price, then you'll end up paying. All right, so the counterparty will be in receipt of money from the participants in the scheme. So it's not a one-way street sort of incentive. I think one of the charms of the RCM is that it is nicely balanced. If you're worried that the market will go long and there'll be lots and lots of lower priced product in that undermines your economics, then the RCM is a great way of giving you an insurance that you'll be able to, your investors will stay whole and happy. On the other hand, by taking it on, you are sacrificing your own exposure to the upside. And that's the premium that you're paying. So I think that balance that's been designed into the RCM is actually a really attractive way of keeping kind of everyone honest, but still enabling investment to flow into the sector. So I don't think it should distort the underlying drivers or mechanisms here. That having been said, I do worry about just the range of sectors that a successful SAF industry will touch, and it has the potential to touch them in a very, very positive way, but it's also therefore exposed to some inadvertent, sort of, I wouldn't call it negligence, but sort of inattention in some way that doesn't feel a very strong ownership of the space, which could sort of really mess things up. So a degree of conscious whole system understanding of what it takes to enable a brand new sector to emerge and providing some coordination of that would be welcome. Whether that looks a little bit like mission control in the electricity transition or something else, I don't know. But something around there to provide more comfort would be important. It does touch a lot of parts of the economy and a lot of parts of the department.
Thank you, Chair. And can I start by heartily endorsing your encouragement of engineering as careers and as education. As an aeronautical engineer, before I came to this place, I'm available for motivational speeches whenever necessary. I picked up, and it's something that I've picked up from discussions with industry on this up until now, and I'm not quite sure I'm convinced about being agnostic to the SAF production and source and mechanism. And my worry is that doesn't give enough ability to shape the environmental benefit of that SAF stream and incentivise the most beneficial SAF production, so PTL compared to some of the earlier Gen SAFs and different even Gen 2 SAFs. Does the bill as presented give enough of the right mechanisms to incentivise the right sort of SAFs that are going to be most beneficial, that are going to provide us with the greatest environmental benefit?
So the bill provides financial security for industries producing SAFs, which I think is essential. I don't think it has real tweaks to favour particular SAFs. Now, whether you want to do that or not is another matter. The problem is that some SAFs have a better environmental sort of signature, they are better, but we're going to run out of those. I mean, ultimately, the real SAFs that we are going to be looking at globally are massive algal productions and artificial kerosene, whereby you produce sort of like huge amounts of energy, you use water, you use CO2 from the atmosphere, and you actually create kerosene. Now, that is extortionately expensive at this moment in time, but, as I said, 14,000 planes going up 4% per year. By 2050, you will have a very, very large number of planes in the air at any one moment in time. There will not be enough waste, there will not be enough cropland or algal stuff to produce the SAFs we need. So it's Generation 4, Generation 5 are the ones that will be the ones that ultimately look after the aviation industry. So I would still say be agnostic. I can't believe I'm saying this. Let the economics work its way through at the moment to see who comes out on top in the UK, and then take through the next generation.
Professor, can I thank you for your evidence and illuminating us with the alumni in our midst.
It's amazing where my students end up.
No, thank you, Professor. Very interesting contribution.
Thank you, Chair. One slightly straightforward question, one a little bit more spiky. But on the first one, we've heard a lot about how there's the need for working across government to really ensure that we get the most effective outcome from this bill, which seems, and all the evidence we've heard, seems like it's the right thing, it's structured well, but how do we ensure that, you know, the municipal waste streams match up with incentives for heat networks and waste hierarchies and that sort of stuff? We've heard a lot about mission-based government. Is that what's going to give the advantage to being able to coordinate across departments? And can you give us a bit of an account of what you're doing so far to kind of pull those departments and different groups together to make sure it works?
Well, to get any bill this far, as any member will know, it has to have all right-round government consent. So government knows exactly what it's doing in a joined-up way. And to answer your mission part, we have said that we want to be, a clean energy superpower. This helps us do that exactly. It gives us sovereign capability here on UK shore to do that. What it's the right thing to do, but in the increasingly uncertain geopolitical situation we face, it's almost becoming essential. And the other mission that we have is growth. Now, I heard some very big figures today about what this could mean. Our department figures show at least 5 billion GVA added if we do this, and around about 15,000 jobs.
We will adjourn this committee for division. We'll try and get back as quickly as possible. Thank you. Continue with our proceedings, and Luke Pollard to continue. Oh, sorry. It's not Minister of State yet. It's not Minister of State yet, but soon, I'm sure. Luke Taylor, forgive me. Thank you.
Thank you. Very helpful first answer. Second one, around a theme that I brought up a couple of times. It's echoed with a couple of the parties giving evidence around the ETS funding. And I'm going to be a little bit kind of pointed here, but to say that if you'd had the choice and had the permission from Treasury to actually get that funding from the ETS rather than passing it on to firms and then on to passengers, would that have been something that you would have seen as an optimal solution rather than clearly the constrained times we're under?
I want to avoid the pitfall, Mr Pritchard, of commenting on Treasury policy as the departmental minister, but I did hear some evidence earlier that ETS was 500 million that came in, and what did they get back for it? Well, I would say £2.3 billion worth of investment in the ATI that's looking at engine capacity, hydrogen, reduced noise technologies. We're investing more than we ever have done in that area. And also we are now aligning or in negotiations with aligning our ETS with the European Union, which actually would give us a bigger market and therefore help a lot of aviation in this space. So in addition, and as well, the 2.3 billion, we recently announced, the Chancellor announced £63 million in the advanced fuel fund. So government for sure is putting its money where its mouth is, and as part of the work I've done this year to sort of restart our confidence in aviation, I set up the Jet Zero task force, and that is jointly chaired between me and Minister Sarah Jones at DBT. So there is an awful lot of joined up thinking in this area.